differentiate between legal immigration and illegal immigration, the undertone from your side is that somehow people who are coming illegally are trying to break into the country, that are trying to do something wrong, when in fact it took me 17 years to go through the legal immigration system, and I am not disparaging of people who are trying to come to this country for all the
Come to the country legally through the ports of entry. Stop coming across the border illegally because you're breaking the fucking law. The truth is the truth.
reasons that drive people to come to the
Well,
United States.
I did notice in your statement that you talked about illegal border crossing. So at least you acknowledge that it's illegal, and you're willing to use the word illegal in characterizing their activity, are you not?
Well, sure, of course.
So it's illegal for them to cross the border.
It's shocking how few people are signing up for their Camp Lejeune Justice Bank claim.
The act of crossing the border, if you are apprehended within a certain radius of the border, is considered an illegal act. That is correct.
And can you give me some other examples of asylum claims or refugee claims that aren't legitimate? Or is every claim legitimate?
No, there's very specific asylum law, and
Which ones are not legitimate claims?
you have to meet the standards that are defined by asylum law. And by the way, a refugee is a status that's accorded when you're outside of the country versus an asylum seeker who comes to the border.
If we
Claim asylum.
If we were able to intercept, if we were able to intercept everybody who's trying to enter this country illegally, and you acknowledge when they cross that border that is an illegal act, so they are breaking the law. If we were able to apprehend every single one of them, and they all claim that they're refugees or they're seeking asylum, are there any that you would reject for those claims, and under what reasons?
Well, first of all, it is legal to seek asylum at the border.
Okay.
It is
Which
legal
ones
to
would
seek
you
asylum.
reject?
It is legal to seek asylum at the border. So not everybody who comes to the border and crosses is immediately engaged in an illegal act. But there are people who are not seeking asylum who come and cross the border, and if they're apprehended within a certain radius of the border, then that's considered.
If they tell you they're seeking asylum, would you at least give them a proceeding?
You have to have a proceeding.
Yeah.
So,
To go through at least a determination.
so it seems to me like most of them that come across have been trained to say the word
Yep.
asylum.
Sorry.
And then at that point, your policy would be
Let me.
believe that they have that they should
You
be
have to determine
considered.
whether or not they have a legitimate asylum.
Okay, in that
That is
determination,
international human rights law.
what would you use to deny them asylum? What are
There
the,
is a very specific process and very specific metrics that you have to meet. One of the challenges and one of the reasons President Biden asked for more asylum officers and more immigration judges is so that people could actually have their claims heard and they could actually go through the process quickly, because right now we don't have enough. And so if you're interested in having people be assessed and their claims be processed quickly, then the best thing to do would be to add immigration judges and asylum officers so that you could actually get those claims heard. And when people are given the determination, they generally leave.
I hope you feel like I'm giving you enough time.
I do now.
Okay.
Yes.
Should they be, if they're seeking asylum and they commit a crime, should they be detained?
Well, right now, I mean, if there's, it depends on what status they're in. These are technical questions that a lot of it depends on what status they're in.
I feel like they should be detained.
Hey,
If
yep.
you support
Yeah, no matter what that is.
I do not think that a wall is going to solve our problems, though.
What? Is it the majority of your, how would you characterize the position of your party? Does it generally support building a wall or not?
I think the position of our party is we should have comprehensive, humane immigration reform that modernizes the immigration system so that we can have an orderly process for people to be able to be with their families and contribute to our economy.
She need to be fucking fired. She's a traitor to the United States of America's corporation. She wants illegal aliens to come in here so she can have someone to do her dishes.
So not building a wall. Let me just focus on one other small set of questions. I appreciate everybody's indulgence and patience here. Are you aware that when somebody is here illegally, or maybe they say they're seeking asylum or they're a refugee or whatever their claim is, but they're not a citizen, that they are counted in the census, and that is used to allocate seats in the House of Representatives? Like, the population of people who are not here legally is used to be counted in the census and in the apportionment of representatives.
Yes, every single person in this country is counted.
So even the illegal immigrants are counted.
Every person in this country is counted, and that is according to our
Now you
Constitution.
see why they allowing people to come in
Should
legally.
illegal, I don't think our founding fathers foresaw this situation, and I have sponsored a constitutional amendment to remedy this. But should illegal immigrants be counted for the purposes of apportioning
But then they can live in the country.
If you're suggesting that people who have undocumented status should not count for the work that they do and the contributions that they make to
They
this
shouldn't be
country,
working.
I would say absolutely I do not agree with that. I think every person should count and is important to be counted. I
counted
think
for what, though? Should they be able to vote?
well, there used to be places that did allow people to vote in local elections, school board elections and things like that. But
Should they be able to vote in presidential races or in the House, or for representatives in the House
I
race?
think the question is, how do we treat the people that
Bitch, that man gave you the
our
question.
foods are on the front lines of our healthcare crisis?
The question is what he asked you, not the question that you want to make it into being.
Are doing the farm work that we need done, are serving us in numerous ways, are doctors, lawyers, contributors to our economy, and yet are unable to get legal immigration status because Congress and Republicans in Congress over decades have refused to fix the immigration system so that we can just continue to talk about immigrants as if somehow they don't contribute and they're a drain on our economy. The CBO just came out with a study that showed that the unexpected migration into this country contributed $7 trillion to our GDP, $1 trillion more in revenues than was expected.
Yeah, shut the
I
fuck
never
up.
hear anybody on your side ever talk about that. All we hear is about the drain on our economy and how immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, are so terrible. I'd love to hear you talk about the contributions.
The
What
great thing about
contribution?
this committee is I don't have a 5-minute counter. Now, my colleagues may not agree. So what I get to do is ask you the same question again until you answer it or until it becomes painfully obvious that you won't. Should people here who are not citizens
Vote.
be allowed to vote?
Yes or no?
President, or be allowed to vote
Yes or no?
U.S. representatives?
Yes
I think
or
there are
no?
many places that are considering
Hold on, bitch.
elections and people being able
Yes
to weigh in
or no?
And I think that that's appropriate.
So let me ask the question again, because I don't have a 5-minute timer. Should people who are not citizens of the
Vote.
United States be
How many times?
Please don't talk over me, and I'll give you the same courtesy. Should people who are not citizens of the United States be allowed to vote in the for president or for members of the House of Representatives?
Are you including legal permanent residents as well as undocumented immigrants?
I'm including, and I would like you in your answer to include asylum seeker, people who say they're seeking asylum, people who have crossed the border illegally and we don't know they're here, and people who claim to be refugees but are not citizens. Should they be allowed to vote in a presidential race or for a
I
race for
am
the
not
U.S. House of
at this
Representatives?
point for that, but I do think we should think about how we ensure that people, for example, are legal permanent residents. I was a legal permanent resident for quite some time. For a variety of circumstances, even though technically you should be able to become a citizen when you're after 5 years. But I do think that there's a place to think about different categories of people being able to make their voice heard in our democracy. But I'm not advocating for undocumented immigrants to be able to vote in congressional or presidential elections.
Now, let me get to my original question that I'm trying to get to where I started. Is should that population of people be counted toward the apportionment of representatives? So, for instance, there are probably at least 6 extra representatives for the state of California because of the policy that non-citizens are counted not just in the census, but they're also counted toward apportionment of representatives for the House and also for the Electoral College. There are only 6 representatives in total for the state of Kentucky. So there are more people in the state of California who are not citizens who are counted for the Electoral College and counted for the apportionment of representatives than there are in the state of Kentucky. Do you think that is fair or something that we should continue doing?
I think that every person deserves to be counted. Yes.
But for a presidential vote,
I believe that everybody deserves to be counted for our census, and that is the rules around how our census is determined. I mean, if you want to talk about, we can also get into the Electoral College and how your state has 2 senators, but a giant state like California also has 2 senators. I mean, there's a lot of ways in which we can talk about fairness or what's perceived as fairness in our electoral system.
Mr. Van Drew, do you think that illegal immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers should be counted for the apportionment of representatives in this House of Representatives?
No, I don't. And there are those, and quite frankly, in confidence, those that are on the other side of the aisle who said that a major reason this is all occurring is because it will shift what happens with the census, which will affect the congressional apportionment, which will affect the Electoral College as well. And my person who told me that, who was a friend, and again, I would never mention his name, said, we are going to get to the point that we're bulletproof. You'll never be able to win an election again.
And this was somebody on the other side that I'll talk to.
And you'll never find out who it is.
Well, that's fine.
Man, would they be in trouble?
No, I appreciate that you're not disclosing that person, but this, when I try to find out why do Democrats and Republicans see this so differently? Why is it that we will all with ease vote for this resolution? Because it's just full of common sense and things that a majority of the Americans support, and then it resolves, and that's in the whereas clause, and then it resolves things that the president can do that he's not doing. So I look for what is the difference. Why would people from blue states be so adamant that this is not a problem, or that these are not fixes, or that it's not fixable, when in fact it is? And the one thing I keep coming back to is, in the census, not only do we count illegal immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers, but they count toward the Electoral College. And this predominantly helps the blue states. And so they don't even need to get them to vote, although we've heard they would let them vote in some races, maybe not others. That is a magnet. That is a magnet. That is a reason. Now you have a political reason, and I think we're getting to the crux of why the other side is rejecting this resolution. It should, if it doesn't do anything, it should be easy for them to vote for. But the reality is it does something. It puts a fine point on what the president said at the State of the Union, the things that he said which are not true. And it shows that this president could do a lot to fix the border tomorrow, and he's not. And so I appreciate both of your time, and I yield back.
The chair recognizes a gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley, for 30 minutes.
But if the app sticks around in the U.S., of course, security concerns are still a huge question.
Why wouldn't you just go?
this television is off. We've looked at it. It is not feasible to do whatever the bill thinks it does.
Madam Speaker, last week President Biden presented his State of the Union address, and the reviews from the public show it to be the most poorly received of any that's ever been, where that's ever been measured when the State of the Union has appeared on television. And it's no secret why. You know, the president's tone and his general approach to the address really encapsulated why a lot of people are so turned off by the work, by politics and the work of our government these days. Is that the partisanship and the eagerness to cast blame and to scapegoat rather than to seek common ground and find solutions is exactly why so many people are so frustrated with the direction of our country. But on top of that, the president said a lot of things that just simply did not accord with reality. And so today I wanted to present the 10 most false and least misleading statements from President Biden's State of the Union address. First, near the beginning of his speech, President Biden said, "Not since President Lincoln and the Civil War have freedom and democracy been under assault here at home as they are today." Well, I'm afraid that President Biden has a very short memory, because we all just lived through the COVID era. Starting in March of 2020, the most basic freedoms and tenets of democracy were not just insulted in this country, they vanished entirely in many places. Governors like Gavin Newsom in California declared the legislative branch abolished and barricaded Capitol buildings. This Capitol itself was barricaded, ruling by executive decree, even threatening to declare martial law. Citizens were not allowed to leave their homes. Businesses were not allowed to open their doors. Children were not allowed to go to school or play sports. People of faith were not allowed to worship or even gather for Bible study. Beaches were declared off limits. Curfews were imposed. Even for adults, having dinner with one other couple in a private residence. Pedestrians were tackled, literally, for not wearing masks, walking around outdoors. Employees were fired from their jobs, kids were expelled from school, and consumers were banned from coffee shops over their personal medical decisions. Social media users were suspended for deviating from the government-approved narrative, even if they happen to present true information. Now, it's understandable why Biden would like to pretend that none of this ever happened, but we all lived through it, and the scars will be with our country for a very long time. A second related statement that the president made is that the pandemic no longer controls our lives. The truth is, the pandemic never controlled our lives. It was government actions in response to the pandemic that controlled our lives. And if you look at the data now, where you have different states that took very different approaches to dealing with COVID, what we've learned is that states like California, which had by far the worst lockdowns and restrictions on personal freedom, where people's lives were controlled far more than any other state, actually had among the worst public health outcomes as well. And so now what you see on the part of many, and in particular the Biden administration, is that it's very clear that this was in many ways the worst set of policy decisions our country has seen in modern times. Restrictions on personal liberty, damage to our economy, damage to our children was all done for absolutely no reason. So there's an attempt to pretend that none of this ever even occurred, which is what the president's remark in his State of the Union is an example of. But even more so, look at the testimony of members of this administration before Congress this term. You had Education Secretary Miguel Cardona, who gave false testimony to our committee, the Education and the Workforce Committee, when he claimed that he never encouraged states to adopt student vaccine mandates, when he did precisely that, and encouraged states to adopt student vaccine mandates. Or you had Health and Human Services Secretary Becerra, who claimed in testimony before our committee that he never forced anyone to do anything and didn't impose a toddler mask mandate, when in fact Head Start, which is under his jurisdiction, did have a mask mandate for 2-year-olds and up that flew in the face of even the policy of the European counterparts of the CDC and the World Health Organization. Mr. Becerra, by the way, could not point to one public health benefit of that policy. You also had Douglas Parker, who's the head of OSHA, in testimony before my subcommittee, claimed that the Biden administration never tried to do an employer vaccine mandate, when in fact they tried to do just that, which would have applied to tens of millions of Americans if the United States Supreme Court had not struck it down. The third statement from President Biden was his statement that he's already cut the federal deficit by over $1 trillion. This is just plainly numerically false. When President Biden took office, the national debt was $27.8 trillion. Today, it is $34.2 trillion. In just a few years, it's gone from $27.8 trillion to $34.2 trillion. And the reason is no mystery. The president went on a massive spending spree with bills passed that included multiple trillion-dollar increases in spending, which of course has not only increased the debt beyond anything we've ever seen, but is what triggered this inflation crisis that is still causing so many American families to struggle. Which brings me to the next statement of the president's during the State of the Union, which is, now our economy is the envy of the world. Far from being the envy of the world, our economy is a source of great dissatisfaction from the folks who live in our country. A recent New York Times poll asked, do you think the economy is better or worse than it was 4 years ago, or is it about the same? 21% said it's better, 63% said it's worse. 3 times as many people said the economy is worse today than it was 4 years ago. The Times poll also asked, thinking about the nation's economy, how would you rate economic conditions today? 8% or 28% said either excellent or good. 72% said only fair or poor. 28% to 72%. A related statement from the President's State of the Union was that wages keep going up and inflation keeps coming down. Both are demonstrably false. In fact, since President Biden took office, real wages and take-home pay have decreased, in some sense because folks are not getting the same number of hours that they used to be getting. And when it comes to inflation, here are just a few statistics for you. Prices today, at this point, compared to 3 years ago. The price of gasoline has gone up by over 33%. The price of hotel rooms by 31%. The price of household energy by 29%. The price of transportation by 27%. The price of airfare by 23%. The price of groceries by 21%. The price of restaurant meals by 20%. The price of used vehicles, new vehicles, housing, rent, overall inflation, personal care, furniture, all in the high teens. The list goes on. And here's the thing, the president's statement that inflation is coming down, that is not any source of great personal satisfaction or encouragement for folks who are having to deal with these prices. The chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, recently noted, we don't expect to see a decline in the overall price level. That doesn't tend to happen in economies. We don't expect to see a decline in the overall price level. It has not happened yet, and it's not going to happen according to the chairman of the Federal Reserve. The irresponsible spending policies of this administration have unleashed inflation and a rise in prices that is not going away for American families. In President Biden's State of the Union, he also said that to remain the strongest economy in the world, we need the best education system in the world. The problem is that this president's policies have made it more difficult for us to have a good education system, let alone the best education system in the world. Last week, we held a hearing in the Education Committee on charter schools, which have been shown across the board to produce tremendous results in expanding opportunity and lowering achievement gaps, in increasing student achievement across the board. And yet one of the first things that the Biden administration did as soon as he took office is to go after charter schools and cut charter school grants. Not to mention the school shutdowns that were enacted across this country in states like California, and this president never came out and did a single thing to get governors like Gavin Newsom to let kids come back and go back to school. And we're going to be dealing with the harms from these school shutdowns for a very, very long time. Perhaps the biggest domestic policy mistake, if we look at all the mistakes during COVID, perhaps there was no bigger one than the school shutdown that did so much harm to so many kids. President Biden also stated, in my first day in office, I introduced a comprehensive plan to fix our immigration system, secure the border. He did no such thing. He did quite the contrary on his very first day in office and his first days in office, with dozens of executive actions that made the border less secure. And the results were utterly predictable. We now have 8 million illegal border crossings since the president took office. He set the all-time record in his first year, he broke that record in his second year, and he broke that record in his third year. For several years, going back to 2014, before he took office, there had only been 5 months, a handful of months out of all of those months and all those years, where you had more than 100,000 people come across the border illegally. That figure has been met each and every month since President Biden took office. And so you can look at exactly what he did and trace these consequences to that change in policy, those unilateral changes in policy, where he ended the migrant protection protocols, remain in Mexico. He instituted catch and release. He ended Title 42. He ended the border emergency. He completely distorted and warped the parole and asylum systems to let tens of thousands of people into the country. These are the things that he did when he took office. The idea that he came into office and proposed fixing our system and securing the border could not be more out of touch with reality. The president also stated that he's ready to fix it, referring to the border. That's what he said. I'm ready to fix it. If he was ready to fix it, he would have fixed it. He would have reversed the unilateral actions that he took when he became president that have caused this unprecedented number of people to come across the border. What's more, he could provide encouragement for the Senate to pass the Secure the Border Act, H.R. 2, which we passed in the House towards the very beginning of last year. It has been gathering dust over in the Senate, and the president hasn't done that. If he was truly ready to fix it, if he was ready to fix the crisis at our border, he would have done so.
In Walmart buying things all day, things that I really truly don't need. $400 was put in my bank account.
So, the ninth false and misleading statement from the president's remarks are that violent crime has fallen to its lowest level in the last 50 years. In reality, violent crime still has not gone back to what it was before COVID. And what's more, property crime has skyrocketed across the country, including a huge increase in vehicle thefts. On the Judiciary Committee, we've held field hearings in Manhattan, in Chicago, right here in Washington, D.C., where we have seen the absolute horrifying amounts of violent crime and number of victims that are being created as a result. We see cities in California like Los Angeles, in San Francisco, and Oakland, where they're literally collapsing. In Oakland, the governor, Newsom, just sent in extra law enforcement because the crime there is so out of control. In Los Angeles, the police will tell you, don't go outside wearing your jewelry if you want to avoid getting mugged. In San Francisco, or in Oakland rather, the In-N-Out just closed its first ever restaurant because it wasn't safe for their customers and their consumers. In Oakland, Taco Bell just announced its 4 restaurants. They're no longer going to have indoor dining. They're no longer going to accept cash. In San Francisco, we see more and more businesses leaving each and every day. Even the store that inspired Toy Story, that's been there for decades, recently closed as well. And the final, truly misleading statement from the president, that for many, many Americans could not be more false, is when he said that tonight we can proudly say the state of our union is strong. Americans overwhelmingly disagree with that statement. They're overwhelmingly dissatisfied with the direction of the country. It's time for change. It's time for a new direction. And my hope is that the president would have recognized that, would have acknowledged his mistakes when it comes to the economy, when it comes to the border, when it comes to public safety, and proposed a new direction, proposed turning the page. And I would have been very happy to work with him if he had done that. And I am still happy to work with him in any way possible. If it's good.
I'm just saying, True to true. It's time to stop playing games. All this bullshit that we being bullshitted by these bullshitters. It is what it is. I'm Mr. Glass. 48.
Hey, what's up? No problem, it's on its way.